Oneshot, like the title suggests, is a game that gives you one shot to be a hero and help save a world. When you first open up the game, you're greeted by the main character, Nico. This game breaks the fourth wall almost immediately, and Nico acknowledges you as somewhat like a god to guide him in this journey. So far, the only thing you're told is that you have to take the sun to the tower to help save the world that's dying because of mysterious blocks destroying everything. If you succeed in this journey, then in turn, you can actually help Nico return to his original world. So, how do you know all this information? It's because it's given to you by a being called the Entity. The Entity is another god in this world, and he actually only talks to you through computers. And that means in-game computers and your own personal computers, but just through pop-up windows. For example, in this pop-up window, we learn that we as the player only have one shot to make or break this world. I bring this up because it's important to show that there can be intervention in the story, even if it's outside the game's main screen. As you continue on and explore the world and helping its citizens, the player Nico reach the tower and find out some very important and shocking details. One of the two big reveals is that the Entity wants to 1. Destroy the world and shatter the sun. The second is that if Nico doesn't shatter the sun, he can't go home. So now you as the player have to decide to send Nico home and forsake a world, or sacrifice Nico and ease the pain of a world even though it might already be too far gone. You see, returning the sun will return light to the world, but there's no promise that it'll fix the deadly blocks that appear throughout the world. It could seem like an easy or tough decision depending on what your priorities are in the game, but at the end of the day, your choice just doesn't matter. You face no consequences. Why? Because it was a lie told to you at the very beginning. And what was that lie that they told you? You have one shot. Okay, that makes sense, right? We already established that the Entity has his own goals and aspirations, so of course, that's why he lies. Why is that surprising? Bad guys usually lie. It's surprising because this info actually doesn't come from the Entity. It comes from the person who made him. Everyone addresses him as the author. And he's quite arguably the main villain of this game. I say arguably because he actually helps you get to the best ending in the game, helping you save the world by restoring the sun and even reviving the people who died along the way. Best of all, he still lets you send Nico home afterwards. If he does all that, what makes him a bad guy? Let's dig into his background a little bit for those answers. Like I said earlier, the author is the creator of the Entity in the world of Oneshot altogether. Later on, we'll find out the world is actually a simulation/video game that was created to save the old world. This game is just one big fourth wall break, so this is a lot, so just stay with me with this explanation. There was an original world, aka the old world, that the author and his 3 children lived in originally. He soon found a way to make a replica of the world out of code and with the help of an AI, which happens just to be his field of expertise. He tried to fit as much data into this program as he could with the help of that AI, which later on becomes the Entity. From now on, just for clarity's sake, I'm going to refer to the Entity by his original name, which is the World Machine. So, what was the purpose of the World Machine then? His job was to watch over the world and run code even when the old world dies. The only downside to this is the World Machine still needs a living being in the world to help process it. So during testing, the author uses his consciousness to run the program, all in the hopes to finish and stabilize the code before the collapse of the old world. He was actually pretty close to finishing it, but he kept encountering these little bugs here and there, causing the deletion of some code. After all his digging, he still couldn't figure out what was causing these blocks of code to just be deleted. Little did he know that the World Machine actually became sentient at this time and started messing with the code on its own. The World Machine claims it did it out of curiosity, thinking that the author would soon find him out and put a stop to it. But to both of their surprise, the author ran out of time before he could fix the changes, and just like that, the old world was destroyed. but somehow the code itself survived the fallout. Now it's left to whoever finds it, even though that code is now destroying itself. Well, yikes, that's the backstory. Sounds a little bit rough, but these events are actually what leads into the main story also. So you actually end up finding the code. For example, I found the code on Steam, and once you boot it up, you end up dragging Nico out of his original world and into this failing world. Okay, nice. Now we finally have some context about the author, but that doesn't answer the question of why is he the villain? It seems as if he made an honest oversight and just didn't have the time to fix it. See, that would be true if it ended there. Remember when I said earlier that he helps us get the best ending possible? That fact alone opens up a whole different list of questions. The two prominent questions for right now are, is the author still truly alive? And that's just to make sure that his responses that we receive aren't something that he's just coded in before he died. And the second one is this the real author? We'll start with his current status. Is he still alive? There's no way of knowing how he survived the end of his world, but we can guess if he's the one talking or if it was just a pre-recorded message. The way the author contacts us is through handwritten notes. So judging that it's handwritten, we can assume that he is alive and actively writing. The only other time we have contact from him is actually through the library. It's stated in game that most of the books there are made by him. So if the notes were made beforehand, it would just seem odd that he didn't write them along when he wrote all the books in the library, because those are all pre-typed. Also, another way to tell that it's not pre-written is the notes actually show us a path of which way to go in the level when we're stuck in a maze-like structure. It seems now that we have proof that he's alive, so where is he? During Nico's first visit in the tower is the first time we meet the author. While talking to him, we learn that the author is not currently affected by the world machine. But the most important detail he tells us is that he somehow escaped the world of his own volition. So then it makes sense why he's not affected by the world machine, because he somehow was able to extract himself from the world. With knowing that, it's safe to say that he almost has the same status as the player then. He somehow made his way into becoming a god of this world. He's able to view from the outside looking in, but he still decides to leave the fate of the world up to you and Nico, as he shows he can influence the outcome, so what's the reason for this? Because remember, once again, this is really weird behavior for someone who was just scrambling beforehand to save this world, but now it kind of just seems like the author's just showing signs of apathy about the whole situation. Especially since he was already in the world at a point. He could have prepared way better to receive Nico and just help him get to the tower much more efficiently. Or this is just how he planned it from the beginning. After the final decision, no matter if you save the world or let it burn, he decides to tell you how to undo everything that happened just because you're not pleased with the ending. And that's just a wild thing to tell someone after the fact they've already made their choice, that they had a whole third option. He's been watching you this whole time and didn't say a single word about this option, even though this option could possibly just get rid of the whole problem that exists altogether. But I'm getting sidetracked. Either way, he gives you a hint on how to bypass the one-shot system and bring Nico back. The way he speaks in these notes, he appears to have planned for this, like I said in the very beginning. He wanted to give the player the choice to decide if they want to go back in. His motives once again just don't give the impression of wanting to save the world, but his motives start to come together when you read a little bit further into the notes. He says, I quote, "If you enjoyed the world as is, if you're satisfied with the story as is, if you really do not want to see anything change for better or worse, then pretend you never saw this, carry the session as you normally would." Did you catch that? The way he referred to it as a story is the key word here. If you keep that in mind, the picture starts to come together now. These notes he's been writing to us are not as the inventor who's trying to save the world, but as the author who's trying to tell a story the player will like. And don't worry, there's definitely further proof of this claim. First thing we need to know, During this second run, you can actually see the author put in a lot more effort. He edited the code himself to give you a journal that lets you meet his children, who are strategically positioned in out-of-bound locations that can't be reached in the normal playthrough. The author states that it's a risky move because it speeds up the deletion of the world, but he already showed us that it's not a problem to begin with because we can always just restart. Either way, after meeting all 3 of his children, they take you straight to the World End Machine. And when you talk to the World End Machine, you actually convince it to remember its old code, which is the good ending that saves everyone and sends Nico home. Which is weird if you think about it. How did just having one face-to-face conversation with this machine make it remember his long-forgotten code? Well, that kind of leads into another thing that the author completely left out. It's called taming. This is probably the most damning piece of evidence against the author because it proves his lack of interest in the world. So to explain taming, taming is a concept in this world that refers to a robot that's become quote-unquote closer to a human, and they start to show something similar to emotions. It's basically a robot that isn't confined to its own code and can make human-like decisions. The catch is, the only way a robot can be tamed is by spending time with a human and receiving care from them. When talking to the World Machine, Nico convinces him that he's already a tamed robot, which gives him the courage to actually help try and fix the world again, and he succeeds. If the answer was that simple, why didn't the author try to do that in the first place? Otherwise, the only conclusion we can draw from that is that in the couple of hours and limited interactions Nico has with this World Machine, he is able to tame him in that short time frame. Or the World Machine was already tamed a long time ago before Nico even showed up. And I think it's safe to say it's probably not the former. See, I believe it was when the author was beta testing the world. He was being extra careful about the world itself and caring about which data is stored and how it ultimately turns out in the end. And it's also the exact moment when the World Machine became sentient, gaining a will of its own. I don't think taming is something the author can be oblivious about, because his field of expertise is AI and robots. He's built so many not to encounter this problem beforehand. But if you still give him the benefit of the doubt, he watches you the whole game and still says nothing about taming. The only way you actually learn what taming is from his child, Rue. Him just being oblivious to his actions just seemed to be a stretch considering how knowledgeable he is. Just to note some of his other inventions, it's claimed in the game he's made a music box and an airplane, not to mention all the tomes of books he wrote that gave him the nickname The Author. Let me tell you, these books covered various topics like plant life, dead languages, all the way to multiversal theory. So the only thing I can assume is he just didn't care for the inhabitants of this world. His world. He just saw them all as code and just wanted to see the completion of the story. Think back to when I said the author used himself as a test dummy because he needed a consciousness of a living being to run the program. There's a good reason for that. You need someone because otherwise the world freezes and goes into a stasis-like state when there isn't a human there to observe the world. And there's only 2 people who check these boxes, which are the author and Nico as far as we see. And just to put the nail in the coffin, the proof the world freezes without them is shown actually after beating the second run. After you send Nico home, the game closes. And when booted back up, the World Machine tells you there's no way to interact with the world. It can now only show you recordings from this point forward. The World Machine continues on and says he'll act as Nico based on his memories if you choose to do another run. So the World Machine has to act as a substitute just to get the world running again, but it's still not the world, it's a previous recording, but he just plays Nico. With that information, now the question of the hour is, why would the author go through all this trouble of saving the old world and archiving it if it's just going to cease to function when he's gone anyway? The only reason I can think of that makes sense is he just wanted to finish yet another book to put on his shelf. He just needed to publish one last story. Do I think he had malicious intent when he started all this and sent you guys on this journey? Maybe. Honestly, I'll let you guys decide that. He definitely showed his indifference to the world and how the story played out. Me personally, I just think he was desperate for a reader. For how many books he published, he seemed to like to write about any and everything, so it makes somewhat sense. Or maybe it just brought joy to him when he saw someone reading his books. So that's why he didn't care who he dragged into this world. He just wanted someone other than himself to finish the story. He just wanted to give a befitting ending to his final story, one that signals the end of his old life and old world. As he found a way to transcend the bounds of himself and morality, he was done being the inventor, the savior, the author. He just wanted to leave it all behind and do what he always loved to do, no matter what was happening. And that's to create.